Hello and welcome to the Crystal Palace podcast. I'm Alfonso Greenborough, and in today's podcast I'll be looking over the game against Brighton but bringing you my match review, player rankings and my man of the match. As well as this, I'm also bringing you interviews with Roy Hodgson, Wilfried Zaha, Christian Benteke and Scott Dan after the game. So let's begin. Crystal Palace's long-standing rivalry with Brighton Hove Albion has been defined by one man over recent years, Wilfried Zaha, and while the Londoners have been on the losing end of the so-called derby on the last two occasions, it was their talisman who changed the course of yet another game between the adversaries. Palace held the Seagulls to a 1-1 draw despite having their squad racked by injuries when, after 75 minutes of fending off the South Coast side's assaults, Zaha blasted with an emphatic outcome into the visitors' net. Palace suffered an early scare when Brighton exhibited their ability to swiftly push forward within 10, as Lewis Dunk played the ball from his own half into the feet of Aaron Moy, who occupied a dangerous space near the edge of the Eagles' area. Left with room to get his head up, the online midfielder unleashed a fierce shot, which clipped the side netting and announced the visitors' intentions. After a spell of Palace pressure, with the game staying close but fleetingly growing in intensity, the Seagulls unnerved Roy Hodgson's men to no avail for the second time. Martin Montoya forced his way onto the ball under pressure from Zaha in the box, but Vicente Guaita expertly saved the Spaniards' resulting shot from 10 yards before catching Dunk's header from the resulting corner. There had been a glimmer of fire exhibited over the last 4 decades between these two sides as the match found its tempo, but by half-time few inside sellers as much as discussed going into the break. A point of discussion did arise, however, when James McCarthy replaced Zaha in a half-time substitution. James McArthur assumed Readable's position at left-back. Another perhaps more immediately noticeable talking point arose when Palace broke early into the second half, and Jordan Ayew fed Christian Benteke along the left wing. Acting as a makeshift winger, Benteke lifted the cross into the box, which struck Mark Ryan's far post out of nowhere, energising Sellers on the chilled evening. But on balance, the chance appeared to fall against the run of play, and Brighton finally broke the deadlock when Maupay slashed the ball into the roof of Palace's net from close range moments later. The Seagulls then sought to double their advantage with a corner lifted from the training ground. Pascal Gross rolled the pass out to the edge of the box and, rising to collect the subsequent cross, Guaita dropped the ball before landing relieved on top of Maupay's online effort. The Eagles refused to be pinned back, however, and Benteke again caused a Brighton scare from the left as he turned Dunk and unleashed a venomous effort towards Ryan's near post, only for the shot stopper to get down low rapidly and turn the ball away. With the wind in their sails, Palace launched themselves at the guests, throwing offensive charges forward via Ayew through the middle and Martin Kelly down the right. Their momentum signalled something was brewing, and Hodgson's men ultimately found their impassioned breakthrough from the left boot of the only man the rivalry belongs to, Zaha. Shimmering his weight from foot to foot on the left of the box before firing past Ryan, the 27-year-old sent Sellers into raptures. The Eagles maintained their stampede through McCarthy, who struck wide, and Ayew, who struck high, and appeared ready to add a second goal. After 75 minutes of uncomfortable viewing, South London had something to will on, but, in spite of Palace's efforts, Brighton reacted well and Potter made a handful of defensive changes. Ultimately, the Eagles were unable to add a second, and full time saw the spoils shared. So I'm now going to move on to my player ratings, but before I start, don't forget you can follow us on both Twitter and Facebook at Crystal Palace for all the latest Palace news. So if you are someone like myself who does like to follow a vast array of Palace accounts, whether that be on Twitter or Facebook, then of course do head over to the respective sites and follow our accounts at Crystal Palace. Now obviously if you are someone like myself who obviously keep up to date with all the latest Palace news, so whether that be sort of the ongoings with the academy, the ladies team, injury news, if you want to keep up to date with all that sort of stuff, of course once again I'd highly recommend you do follow us on there, because of course as soon as we find articles, as soon as something's put out by the club, we obviously put it up on there for you guys to obviously to read, have a look through, but also to react to as well, so we love that interaction there. And in terms of alongside that, we obviously keep it up to date with transfer news, so even though we're not in January yet, there's still been loads of rumours for the last few months now about players coming in, players going out, so of course if you're someone who wants to keep up to date with all of the rumours, all of the quotes from players, quotes from agents, all different things like that relating to transfers, of course do give us a follow on there, because once again, like just general news, as soon as we find an article, as soon as we find sort of a little snippet or a little quote or a little rumour, we'll obviously put it out there for you guys to get involved in as well. And obviously just alongside that, obviously interviews as well, so linking back to transfers, obviously interviews with the players themselves or the players' managers, agents, sorry, and of course management, anyone really involved in the club or with something to say, which interview wise we think will be interesting for you guys to have a look at, we'll of course post that on the site as well. So if you want to place realistically, to get all the news, the transfer latest, and of course the interviews as well, obviously do head over and follow our accounts there. And obviously, much like all Palace accounts, we also give our opinion on there, so there's a few of us who run the page, so before the game, sort of after the injury news or injury updates in the press conference, reacting to the lineup, reacting at half time, reacting. If you're someone who wants to get sort of just another person's opinion, that instant match reaction after the game, you just want another account to follow to get that. Of course, I'd highly recommend you do follow us on our social media accounts. Now, a great place for you guys to share your opinion is in the YouTube comments. So if you are listening to the podcast on YouTube, then do feel free to drop a comment below the video with your player ratings, where you rate the players' performances from 1 to 10, and that is with 10 being the best. Now, I say this every week, but the reason I want you guys to do that is just so you guys get involved, you share your opinion of the game, and just so I can read through it, compare how we sort of individually thought the players performed, and just see whether we had sort of a different outlook of the game. Because certainly many games this season, some people have said some players have played well, but then equally they've said actually this player wasn't actually quite up to it. So of course it's nice to have a discussion based upon the player rating. So if you're someone who might have a different opinion to me, or thought I might have missed something out in terms of a player's performance, of course feel free to comment that below, just once again obviously so that you can put your opinion across, but also so I can read through it and just sort of have a feel for what you guys think. And obviously if you don't want to do that, or if you're a Brighton fan who finds yourself somehow on this channel, of course comment below with your general views of the game. So obviously a Brighton perspective, they're below us in the table, but they'd be happy with a point, whereas a Palace perspective, obviously we're thinking we're quite lucky to get away with a point, given the fact that how badly we performed for 70 minutes, and the fact that we did get the goal in the game was because of how well we played in the final sort of 10-15, I suppose you could say 10-15 minutes of the game as well. So obviously two perspectives there. Obviously Brighton going to be relatively happy, probably arguably, given their first half performance in particular, should have got all 3 points. But then you're looking at Palace's sort of last 20-minute performance, and 15-20, that sort of region at the game, right towards the end of the game, we look at it going, actually, yes, the rest of the game was dire, but in terms of the quality of the goal we scored and the chances we had late on in the game, you could say that a draw is a fair result. But then likewise, we were quite lucky that we actually was able to scrape the 1-1 in the first place. So of course, whichever opinion you have of the game, whether it's a moment in the game you think I haven't mentioned, or you want to sort of talk more about, or just something you think that you might disagree with what I said, obviously feel free to comment that below. And it's not just so that I can read it, any other fans who come to the channel, who listen to the podcast, they can listen to obviously my opinion, what I'm saying right now, but also read the comment section as well, hear and read what other people have had to say as well. And of course, once again, just start a discussion based upon that. So if you're someone who likes to be who is opinionated, likes to share his opinion or her opinion, but also wants to share your ideas with me, of course feel free to do that in the comment section below. Now, if you do want to follow any of the social media pages that I've mentioned, or join our Facebook group, then do check all links that will be in the description below. But I'm now going to move on to my player ratings, starting a goal with Vicente Guaita, who I'm going to give a 7 overall. Now, in terms of Vicente's performance, I sort of run out of things to describe him, we're only 16-17 games into the season or so, and that's just because of how good his performances have been this season. I'm running out of words to describe how good he's been this season, and I've given him another 7 here, and that's just because it was another sterling performance from him. Yes, he didn't get a clean sheet in this game here, but certainly in terms of the chances that Brighton had, and the fact that it could have been 2, even 3 nil at half time, you've got to look at someone like Brighton, how important he was to the team in terms of helping us through the sticky patch when we were playing absolutely terribly. And then obviously once we got that one goal, to obviously bring it back to 1-1, he was obviously there to remain strong at the back and continue to what he's been doing so great this season, in terms of when called upon, was able to make these saves. he's commanding in the area, make sure, you know, that the back line has confidence. And that's really all I can say about his performance, because that's exactly what we got from his display here, because it was impressive in the fact that there was loads of pressure on him, because obviously we were playing sort of a makeshift back four with Martin Kelly at right back, Zaha Riedewald at left back, and of course later on in the game James McArthur was playing left back. So of course you could understand maybe, you know, he could have struggled a bit in terms of just adapting to the four players in front of him, but the fact that he obviously put in an impressive display in terms of his saving, or his saves he made, but also was able to continue to be commanding, given the fact that it was a makeshift back four. There were changes in it, you know, halfway through the game or at half time. So the fact that he was able to be commanding to that back four was of course impressive as well. And obviously that sort of aspect of his game, that commanding, was also really good in the first half, when obviously there were a few sort of dodgy balls coming into the area, and of course, you know, they obviously went through the Palace back line, and Guaita was obviously positioned in the right position just to fall onto the ball, just to catch the ball, and of course release it upon that. So, you know, obviously as a team we were collectively playing quite you know, quite bad. We were just giving possession too easily away to Brighton. But then likewise, you know, we've got someone like Guaita who, yes, Brighton had loads of possession, but he was there to make up for it in the fact that any chances they did have, he was there just to get in the way. And obviously quite a lot of the time, you know, he was, in terms of just diving on the ball, just holding on to the ball, just simple things like this, from balls that are coming into the box right easily past the defenders, just little things like that, doing the little saves as well as impressive saves as well. That's something that I really liked about his performance. Now, obviously, there was a little bit of a stumble or a fumble, you know, in that second half. Obviously, you know, they've gone up for the ball, might have dropped it, but then, of course, he fell on it anyway. But, you know, other than that, it was a pretty good performance, and that's why I've given him a 7, because I tend to sort of repeat myself week in, week out, because that's how good his performances are. He's consistently at this high level in terms of being impressive with the saves he's making, just being commanding, you know, getting that confidence into the back line. So the fact that he done them 3 things in this game, like he's done all season, as well as, you know, not letting that little sort of fumble in that second half affect his overall performance, was of course great to see. Now, one thing I would say is, obviously watching the game, is a little bit frustrating to see us, or see Guaita in particular, take so long to release the ball from goal kicks. But I suppose you've got to look at it as well and go, there was no options there. But that was just something I thought, that we didn't have much possession, and, you know, you've just got someone standing there with the ball. Whereas if you just, you know, if Guaita obviously just got someone else to run, or someone in the team just took the initiative to actually make a run and make himself available, then Guaita could have released the ball quicker and we could have started a counter-attack. Now, that's not obviously a negative on Guaita's performance, but it was just so annoying, you know, sitting in the stands, actually looking at him just holding on the ball for like 30 seconds, and it's like, you could have released that already and we could have gone on the counter-attack. So whilst it's obviously not his fault that there was no options, obviously it would have been a little bit nicer, obviously, to see him release the ball a bit more often in the game. But like I've said, you know, fully deserving of the 7. You know, I can't really say much more about his performance other than the fact that it's been as consistent as they all have been this season. So I'm now going to move on to the first player in a defence, and that is the right back Martin Kelly, who I'm going to give a 6 overall. Now, in terms of Martin Kelly's performance, you know, there isn't really too much I can say, just because obviously it was a fairly average overall team performance, but I just think Kelly went about his business, done alright, but there was just one thing about his performance which I weren't quite that comfortable with, and that was obviously just too much space we were just giving Brighton down that flank. Now, of course, most of the time Kelly would be able to go back or go narrow to obviously counteract that and defend against that, which is fine, but I just, sitting in the stands, it was so frustrating just seeing the amount of space we were leaving down both flanks and just making it easy for Brighton, because already we were making it easy by giving them possession, and then you're just giving them all the space out wide as well, just made it that little bit easier for them. So that was just one little thing about Kelly's, well, both fullbacks' performances, which really disappointed me. But I think, you know, you've got to look at Kelly's performance, and on the whole, throughout the whole 90 minutes, I think the 6 is a fair reflection. When you think that obviously towards the end of the game, when obviously we were trying to put pressure on Brighton, we obviously eventually got the goal to obviously go 1-1, but then obviously after that, the chances we had in terms of trying to get that second goal in the game, you know, you've got to look at someone like Kelly and go, he, in the latter stages of the game, he was quite crucial to that, because obviously, even though he's a fullback, he was running up and down that right flank, looking to get crosses into the box, and there were 1 or 2 fairly decent crosses where, you know, he managed to get sort of near to the byline or in line with the penalty area and put in a decent delivery. Yes, sometimes, you know, Matt Ryan in goal was able to catch it. Sometimes, obviously, they were just defended easily. but it was nice to see him actually combine what was a fairly solid defensive performance. You know, nothing great, but nothing bad. So done what he had to do there, and the fact that he made up for that sort of average part of his game with the fact that he was bombing up and down that right flank, getting balls into the box. And yes, not all of them got to Palace players, but just that intent in the first place, particularly in the latter stages of the game where we were looking to get back into it, and we got back into it, looking to get that second goal, put the pressure on Brighton. The fact that we had someone like Martin Kelly there was really good to see, and I think in particular Jordan Ayew was someone who really benefited from it, because I think Kelly and Ayew as a partnership down that right flank actually worked really well, because obviously Kelly would be able to drive the ball forward, maybe offload it to Ayew, Ayew would hold it up, Kelly's then an option to obviously cross it back in again, or Kelly's there to draw players away so that obviously Ayew can dribble past the space that's been made. So obviously whilst Kelly's attacking performance was good in terms of putting balls into the box, it was also good in terms of just how well he moved forward, how well he partnered with Jordan Ayew, who of course was also playing down that side. But like I said here, nothing really that impressive about Martin Kelly's performance, but the fact that he done the basics, done what he had to do defensively when the rest of the team was playing quite average, and then towards the end of the game came out his shell and was starting to be threatening offensively, that was of course great to see as well. So Martin Kelly here playing right back, I do think these 6 is a fair result. So I'm now going to move on to the first centre back, and that is James Tomkins, who I'm going to give a 7 overall. Now in terms of Tomkins' performance, you know, in what was quite a dull performance, you know, from the most of the team, the fact that I've given him a 7 really reflects in the fact that in a team where obviously players were just pretty average, he obviously was the guy who stood out for me in terms of you could see his effort, you could see him putting his body on the line, and you could just see he was actually trying to make things happen in the game. And that was one of the things which of course just stood out for me, in the fact that just you could see the difference between say his performance and say someone like Scott Dan's performance. And that's not to say that Dan had a bad performance, it's just the fact that with Tomkins he was one of the players who in a collective average team, he was the guy who was, you know, above the rest. And you know, one of the reasons for that was just obviously down to the sort of, I suppose it's his commitment to the game in terms of his attitude to it, but also obviously in terms of his contribution. Now in terms of his tackles, you know, I sort of lost count of the number of well-timed tackles he made in the game, and that really just goes to show, you know, the last 2 games against Brighton, you know, Tomkins has been ripped apart, had horrid games against them. So the fact that he was able to put them behind him and actually put in a solid performance here, you know, given the fact that Brighton had loads of possession, he was still there making these tackles. He's not the fastest player, but he's still running back and managing to catch up with the attackers of Brighton. So the fact that he was able to not only make as many tackles as he did, but also time them really well, so that we were obviously able to, you know, clear the ball and clear the danger off the back of that, was of course great to see. And then you've also got to look at the fact that yes, defensively, you know, making the tackles, winning headers, putting in blocks, that was all good part of his game. But in terms of when obviously Zaha's goal that we scored from, you know, that was all down to James Tomkins. Obviously the ball from, I think it was from Scott Dan's, being lofted into the area, great flick on, you know, from Tomkins to put it into the feet of Zaha, and obviously Zaha does what he does best, does his magic, and of course level things up for us. So not only was Tomkins, you know, contributing well in terms of his defensive work, he wasn't just being better than the rest in terms of just his attitude and the way he was playing in the game, putting his body on the line, but also in terms of his attacking contribution, because he could have easily just let that header, you know, just go by him and, you know, probably went out for a goal kick. But the fact that he made himself big, you know, jumped up, got the slightest of flicks on it just to direct it into Zaha's position, and then obviously Zaha gets on the end of it and scores, obviously just goes to show how good his game was. Because whilst, you know, like I said, Dan didn't have a bad performance, but what I saw from Tomkins was just a little bit more grit and determination. And it's not even just Dan, it's just the rest of the team. I just saw that determination from Tomkins that I didn't see in many other players, and that's why I've given him a 7 overall, because of obviously his defensive work, but also that flick onto Zaha, because of course, you know, at that point of the game it's obviously 1-0 down, we're trying everything we can to obviously get into the box and to get chances. So when you've got the ball coming into the box, sort of the 10 times before that, the ball just either got caught by Ryan or got headed away by a Brighton player. So the fact that on that occasion Tomkins, you know, made the difference in terms of just getting that little flick and leaving it to Zaha to do the rest was of course great to see. So once again here, James Tomkins, you know, really solid performance from him and fully deserving of the 7 I've given him. So I'm now going to move on to his centre-back partner, and that is Scott Dan, who I'm going to give a 6 overall. So like I sort of touched on there, in terms of, you know, Dan, he didn't necessarily have a bad performance, and that's why I've given him a 6. It's just the fact that he was fairly solid, done what he had to do, but in terms of, you know, what Tomkins added to the game, in terms of that grit, that determination, you could just see the effort, and you could see the contribution, like we saw with the goal in terms of that little flick for the assist. So we saw that little bit more effort from Tompkins than we did do with Dan, and that's not to say Dan had a terrible game. It's just the fact that he was pretty solid, nothing outstanding, but you could still see that, you know, one of the reasons why Brighton were just playing better than us is just because people like Dan weren't necessarily playing to their best of their abilities. You know, they were just doing the basics right, and that was about it. Now, obviously, in terms of a negative about his game, and this is obviously one of the other reasons why I've limited him to a 6, it's just there was one chance in particular where he obviously made a poor back pass to Guaita. Obviously, he didn't punish us too badly, but, you know, on another day, you know, you say it was against Man City, against someone like Leicester as well, you know, they would have absolutely punished us. So, other than that little poor pass back to Guaita, I think Dan had a fairly solid game. Obviously, not to the extent that Tompkins had, you know, in terms of constantly making challenges, making blocks, winning headers. But, you know, nonetheless, you know, Dan made himself count. You know, he's obviously not first choice centre-back anymore, so he's been sat on the bench quite a lot recently. So the fact that he's been able to come into the side and just do a shift for the side, that's what you want from your squad players. So the fact that he's been able to continue that, what he's been doing the last few games, just have a fairly solid performance, nothing spectacular, was of course great to see. So once again here, Scott Dan, fully deserving of the 6 I've given him. So I'm now going to move on to the final player in our back 4, and that is the left back Jar Reedwald, who I'm going to give a 5 overall. Now, before I go on to talk about his performance, you know, both offensively and defensively, I think it's worth considering, you know, the fact that Roy Hodgson came out after the game and said he was sort of 50-50 touch and go to start the game because he was obviously carrying an injury in the build-up to it. And of course, before the game, he asked him, "Do you think you're okay to play?" He said yes. And of course, later on in the game, he gets subbed off at half-time. So, whilst we could talk about his performance in the fact that, yes, he was a bit of a liability defensively, but also you've got to look at it and go, actually, in the context of the fact that he was carrying an injury, that's why he was a bit leggy, wasn't quite running that well in the game, wasn't quite too playing to the standards you would expect from someone. Obviously, you've got to consider that, but also you've got to consider, you know, he hasn't played at left-back for Palace before. Obviously, came off the bench for a little cameo the other game, last game, but obviously, on the whole, he hasn't played left back before. So the fact that he hasn't played in that position before, the fact that he was carrying an injury and had to go off at half time, combined with the fact that just the rest of the team around him weren't playing that well, you've also got to consider, you know, all of these things together when you talk about his performance. But one thing I must say, a positive I really felt from his performance is that, yes, defensively he weren't that great, but going forward he was quite an asset to us, because even though our attacks in that first half were limited, you know, you always could rely on Reedwald to actually carry the ball forward from defence and actually ping these sort of nice passes forward to people like Zaha, people like Benteke, people like McCarthy as well. So even though his defensive work was a little bit suspect at times, the fact that when the limited time we had possession, he was able to actually not just, you know, hold on to the ball or pass it back, he was actually actively looking to pass the ball forward, looking to get the ball to the attacking players, was something that was quite nice to see. And in terms of just his positional play, it was almost as though he was sort of targeting and going towards the centre of the pitch. So he was always looking to get to that centre line so that he would be in a position where he could actually have options to pass the ball to. So whilst defensively, like I said, whilst defensively he was a little bit suspect, you know, I just wanted to pick out that part of his game because we know he can pass and he's really good at the distribution part of his game when he's playing the central midfield. So it's nice to see him transfer that to obviously his defensive role at left back. But obviously going on to the negatives really about his performance, you know, the fact that his defensive side of his game was a little bit lacking was of course a little bit disappointing. Now I sort of mentioned it with Kelly and the fact that both sort of fullbacks were leaving far too much space and were making it far too easy for the Brighton players obviously just to run around and pass the ball around our back line, and certainly that was the case for Reedwald on the left hand side. You know, maybe it was down to his inexperience, maybe once again down to the injury, but far too often he was giving too much space to Brighton players. You know, down that flank they kept attacking it, kept targeting it again and again, and that was through people like Martin Montoya, like Aaron Moore, you know, players who, if you give them a chance, they can obviously punish you. So the fact that we were giving them too much space on that left hand side was obviously something Reedwald should really look to improve on, because if you limit their space, if you stop them putting balls in, or if you just put a challenge in and put the ball out for a throw in, rather than allowing them to pass the ball around on the edge of our area, then maybe they would have had even less chances in the game. And you know, you've also got to look at the fact that maybe, you know, also he didn't play that great because he didn't have that much support. But, you know, you don't have to always rely on people like McCarthy, people like Townsend. Obviously, Townsend weren't playing, but normally Townsend and McCarthy are the guys who actually come back and cover the fullbacks, and you can't always rely on that. So whilst you could say Reedwald, yes, he hasn't played much in that position before, and he didn't have protection from and support further forward in the team, you've got to look at it and go, actually, you've got to take it upon yourself as well and attack that, because certainly people, like I said, people like Montoya and Maupay were just having absolute freedom down that left hand side or down their right hand side, just because Reedwood was just leaving too much space for them. But like I've said, I've given him the 5 overall because obviously, even though that part of his game defensively was lacking, the fact that he still brought something to the team, brought something to the table offensively, was good to see. And he was only playing 45 minutes of the game, and in that time, yes, he was suspect defensively, but there were signs of showing that actually, if he could develop the defensive part of his game, he could actually prove to be quite a useful asset for us. And it's worth considering, we've got 2 injuries at left back, with both Slupp and Valan are both out injured for the foreseeable future. So the fact that we've got someone here who can still do a job, but with a little bit more improvement, a little bit more practice, can just be suitable cover for the next sort of few games or so, would obviously be nice to see. Now, in terms of the only VAR moment in the game, that obviously came when Reedwood made a challenge. Obviously VAR said it was no penalty, but worth considering that. Yes, Reedwood was making a few challenges outside the box, obviously because he was giving them so much space. He obviously had to make these, and obviously when he did have to stop Brighton, he made that challenge inside the box. On another day without VAR, that may be given as a penalty, because of course there was no replays to show for it. But just little things like that, just trying to be sensible with your tackling rather than just going in there and putting the risk of actually conceding a penalty. Little things like this is part of his defensive game that if he works on it, he could be a good asset for us going forward. But like I said, subbed off at half time. In terms of his foreplay, he was good in terms of passing the ball out wide, but because he was carrying an injury, like Roy said, and the fact that he hasn't played there before, just ultimately sort of summed up what was a fairly average performance from him. But certainly with the injuries we've got, he's going to be there for the next few games or so, if he obviously isn't injured himself. So hopefully, if he isn't injured, touch wood, obviously we can see him develop over the next few weeks or so. So now I'm going to move on to the first player in the midfield, and that is James McArthur, who I'm going to give a 6 overall. Now, in much like the rest of the team, in terms of just having how bad we were and how sort of anonymous we were in that first half, in the fact that Brighton were controlling everything, the possession, the chances, obviously because of how bad our first half performance was, it doesn't really come as a surprise when McArthur, one of these players who's normally full of energy, he was very sort of lacklustre in that first half. And like I've said, like most of the team, that was sort of a reflection of the team as a whole. So it wasn't really a surprise, given the fact that how the rest of the team were playing. Someone who normally covers a lot of ground, likes to have lots of energy, likes to get on the ball, likes to be involved. It wasn't really a surprise that actually he was quite quiet in the first half. But the thing that really did impress me the most is that even though he was playing in position in midfield there, he wasn't really that involved in the game. But as soon as he was actually moved to left back for the second half, something seemed to click for him, and he seemed to get back to his old self, was able to adapt to that new position at left back, and obviously use his energy, use his tenacity, all of the stuff that he normally shows in midfield, transferred it to fullback, and actually covered at left back and done a fairly decent job there. And that was something that really did come as a surprise for me. The fact that he can literally play anywhere, and he just seems to fit in and do a shift for the team. Now, obviously, it's not ideal that Reedwood went off injured, and it's not ideal having a midfielder play at fullback. But the fact that, given how sort of average his first half performance was, the fact that in the second half he was playing in a different position, playing out of position, and still was able to maintain a better performance than he did in the first half when he was playing in position, just sort of goes to show the character that he's got in him. Now, much like Reedwood, obviously, when he was playing down that left, Brighton, obviously, knowing there's a midfielder at fullback, were looking to exploit that area. And actually, other than the goal they scored, obviously they managed to get down that side, put the ball in and scored from it. Other than that, I think that McArthur done a decent job. Obviously not the best, because obviously that's a makeshift change in terms of him playing at left back. But obviously the fact that he was still able to make that contribution, playing out of position, and actually, make a real sort of be a real asset to us in terms of making up for the mistakes we made in that first half by actually looking to attack Brighton more, actually looking to be more compact defensively. So the fact that he, even though he's playing out of position, made up for that in the fact that he just performed well, done what he had to do, and made up for how bad the whole team's performance was in that first half, made up for that with such an improvement in the second, was of course great to see. And obviously I say this week in, week out, but he shows lots of energy, lots of tenacity in the midfield, and that was really sort of reflected in his performance. Playing at left back, he showed a lot of urgency in terms of when he had the ball, obviously looking to carry the ball forward. When obviously defending wise, he showed the urgency to get back and not give as much space as say Reedwood or say Kelly did in terms of when they were playing at fullback. So the fact that he had that urgency both offensively and defensively to obviously make best use of his time, and even though he's playing out of position, make the best use of his talents, was of course really great to see as well. And quite a lot of the time, well, the majority of the game, obviously we were just struggling offensively, so the fact that we had someone like MacArthur, even though he's playing out of position, we had him to actually start Palace attacks by carrying the ball forward, looking to drive down that left hand side. The fact that we had someone like him was a real asset to us, because even though he's playing out of position, the fact that he could just use or transfer his skills from midfield to left back and continue to be that real threat and be that someone who can actually be able to link the defence to the attack was of course really good to see. So I've given him a 6 overall, because first half probably a 4 or 5 out of 10, and obviously second half maybe a 6 or a 7 in terms of just how much he improved, the fact that he was playing out of position, the fact that he just slotted in at left back so well, and the fact that he was able to play as well as he did in that role. So once again here, James MacArthur, a really good performance from him. Obviously it's not ideal, the fact that Riedewald got taken off with an injury. It's not ideal that our 2 other fullbacks are injured in Slupp and Van Aanholt. But if worse comes to worse and we don't play an academy player, if we have to see MacArthur play at left back, then it won't be the end of the world. Because as we saw in this performance here, he's so versatile, can give his all for the team, and it's just nice to see yet again, another position that MacArthur could possibly play going forward. So I'm now going to move on to the captain, and that is Luka Milivojevic, who I'm going to give a 5 overall. Now, in terms of Luka's performance, it was already quite a disappointing one, because obviously with this being a derby, all of the hype around it, obviously you'd expect him to or rivalry rather, you'd actually expect him as the captain to rival up get the team ready, right up for the game, and would see that reflected in his performance. But I didn't quite see that in his performance here. Didn't quite see the intensity you'd expect for two rivals playing against each other. I didn't really see that commanding part of his game, which you'd expect to see from a captain in a game such high profile as this. And that's why, obviously, I was disappointed with his performance. That's why I've given him a 5. But just look on social media, you see people actually asking for him to be, and called for him to be, dropped from the team now. And that just really goes to show sort of a combination of his games recently, and the fact that yes, he can do a few good things here and there, but just overall he doesn't seem up for it, or he doesn't seem ready for it. He's not having as much influence as you would expect your captain to have in a game. Now, I suppose aside from that, there was a few positives from his performance, in the fact that there were quite a number of firm challenges he put in the game to obviously stop Brighton. But in the first place, if someone like Luka wasn't actually giving away possession that much, wasn't giving the ball away so needlessly, wasn't looking to drive forward and just pump the ball along and just sort of gift the possession back to Brighton. If he had just done these little things better, then it could have been such a different performance from him, because even though he didn't have that many opportunities on the ball, the fact that the limited times he did have, he didn't do much with it, is the thing that was disappointing for me. Because whilst yes, a few impressive challenges here and there, that doesn't make up for the fact that he wasn't quite ruffled up for the game. He wasn't up for it, or it looked quite evident that he wasn't up for it, or as up for it as other players were. He didn't quite have that mentality in terms of, this is the rivalry, we need to win, we need to give our all for the team, because we didn't quite see that fight, I suppose. Is the best way to describe it, because we didn't see that from him, and the fact that that was combined with the fact that he had an average performance. That's why overall I was fairly disappointed with his performance. Now, of course, I'm not going to say that he should be dropped like some people are saying, but certainly he's got to ask questions with the busy Christmas schedule coming up, and with injuries we've got in the side. It's got to be put out there whether Milivojevic keeps his place in midfield. Obviously, I'm not going to call for him to be dropped, because I think that there's still parts of his game, like the firm challenges we saw, which are good. But in terms of the leadership, in the derby game, you need to get your team ready. You need to be up for it. And the fact that we didn't see that sort of energy, that enthusiasm from him, and the fact that that first half in particular was absolutely dire in terms of just giving away possession, making it so easy for Brighton. Little things like this, if you just improved it, then it could have been a complete turnaround from his performance. But I've given him a 5 overall. Obviously a fair reflection of the game here, but also in comparison to games recently, it's sort of, he's continuing to be fairly average in the last few games or so. So hopefully he can pick himself up from obviously what was yet another disappointing performance here. And in terms of his looking at the season as a whole, it's been a fairly average one for him. We just need him to get back to his old best in terms of, yes, putting in these firm challenges, that's great, but you need to get that leadership back, you need to get that energy back, and he just needs to change sort of the way he's playing at the minute, and certainly not keep giving away possession as cheaply as he did against Brighton on Monday night. So once again here, the captain Luka Milivojevic, fully deserving of the 5 I've given him. So I'm now going to move on to the final midfielder, and that is Cheku Kouyaté, who I'm going to give a 5 overall. Now, in terms of Kyoto's performance, the fact that I've given him a 5 is really a sort of a reflection in the fact that, considering the high standards in terms of energy, in terms of his physicality, in terms of everything about his game, which we normally do see, that was obviously lacking in this game here. And, much like what I said with Luka, biggest game of the season, arguably, other than playing Brighton away from home. So realistically, you want your players all to stand up to it, really battle in the game and really give their all effort. And, Kyoto was one of these players who, you could look at him, much like Reedwood, and go, maybe he looked like he was carrying an injury, something maybe problem with the back of his back. But then equally, you could say, actually, we've seen a lot more from him in recent games, so why couldn't we quite see it in this game here? And that's really why I've given him a 5 overall. Now, obviously, throughout the game, I think he was involved in a number of nice interchanges, battled well throughout the game. So in terms of the good parts of play that we had, obviously, we didn't have many good parts and passages of play in the game, but certainly the ones that were good, Kyoto was involved with them, so I suppose that's a real positive from his performance. The fact that he battled well, so even though it looked like maybe he was struggling a little bit with the back of his back, even though that was the case, or whatever the injury was, he still battled through that, was battling well, making himself count, let's say in the midfield, but not necessarily to the standard, not necessarily to the level that we normally would see from him. And in terms of as the game went on, he struggled to really impose himself, couldn't really get involved in the game as much as he would have liked, and just, in terms, like I said, in terms of the standards that he normally set, he was quite far off it. So I do think a 5 overall is a fair reflection, not really anything to really pick out about his performance in particular, other than the fact that even though our good play was limited, a few of our good bits of play obviously involved, nice sort of interchanges between Kyoto and other players in the team. And likewise, going into the second half, it was a complete sort of opposite where, he was struggling to really impose himself, struggling to get onto the game, and that eventually saw him get substituted. So I do think overall the 5 I've given Kyoto is a fair result. So I'm now going to move on to one of our wide players, not normally his normal position, but that was Jordan Ayew, who I'm going to give a 6 overall. So obviously with the injuries we have to Townsend and obviously to Jeffrey Stopp as well, obviously we had to change up the team a little bit, and that obviously Roy Hodgson's thinking was play Benteke at striker and obviously have Ayew out wide, and that's just to sort of utilise the ball carrying and sort of holding up ability that Ayew has, because of course he's got that and the pace, which will be a real asset when he plays wide. So of course that little change in that front three, so Zaha on one side, Ayew on the other, Benteke up top, that change obviously meant that Ayew played his first game in quite a long time for Palace. Actually, I would say out of position, even though he can play across the front three, out of position, playing out wide, and I've given him a 6 overall because I think he had a fair good shot at it. Now, like I've said, even though he hasn't played there this season, I think he worked hard, like he always does, but the fact that he worked hard, given the fact that he's not his position, has still done it to a decent effect in terms of holding up the ball, trying to sort of dribble past players, hold on to the ball, everything, that sort of part of his game was quite good to see. And when he did get the ball, particularly in the second half, obviously what he'd done with it was good, but he just struggled to really get involved in the game, and that was mainly in the first half. All these balls were getting pumped up to him, and him and Benteke both, they couldn't really hold it up, they couldn't really win the headers, and that's why the first half in particular was really disappointing. Now, what you've got to look at is that in comparison, in the second half, Benteke was actually winning the headers like he'd done in the first, but was actually directing the flick-ons to actual Palace players, which obviously allowed us to maintain possession a little bit more, a little bit higher up the pitch, which allowed us obviously to get the ball to people like Ayew, people like Zaha. So obviously Benteke change, or the way he was playing in terms of heading down the ball, obviously that little change obviously led to us playing better. But I just think the way what Ayew was doing in the first half was good, but obviously because the rest of the team weren't playing that great, and the fact that he was really struggling just to make it count, that is why his second half performance was so good, because of how limited it was in the first. And you've got to look at one chance in particular, carried the ball really, really well, obviously released it to Christian Benteke, best chance of the game, and that was sort of in the last 20 minutes or so. So obviously throughout the game, yes, he was winning headers here and there, yes, he was dribbling past players, and he obviously had a chance himself where he got the ball on the edge of the area, tried to curl it top bins, went just over. So whilst that was the case, it just would have been a little bit nicer for him just to be involved a little bit more. But like I said at the beginning, because he's playing out of position, you can understand him not necessarily playing as good as he would normally do. But like I said, in terms of that Christian Benteke chance, it was all down to sort of Ayew sort of being the architect of that, in terms of carrying the ball, releasing Benteke, and of course Benteke was quite unlucky with his chance. But in terms of the whole team's performance, last 20 minutes is when we all sort of bucked our ideas up, and certainly Ayew in particular was one of the players who his performance obviously did improve You know, obviously in the second half, but in that sort of last 20-minute period as well. So, you know, I think overall, I do think the 6 I've given him is a fair result. So I'm now going to move on to the striker in the team, and that is Christian Benteke, who I'm going to give a 6 overall. So like I said with Ayew, in terms of, you know, he worked hard, and arguably this is one of Benteke's best games this season. Not in terms of, you know, having loads of clear-cut chances, but just in terms of the effort, because even though as a team he was struggling against Brighton in that first half, at least Benteke was there to win the headers, but because he weren't directing them to anyone, he was just going back to Brighton, they were regaining possession, and it was just, you know, going in a circle in terms of Brighton have the ball, we win it back, pump it along to Benteke, he heads it down, Brighton get possession again, and just going round and round like that. But the thing that, or the real sort of turning point for me in Benteke's performance is actually in the second half. Rather than him just jumping and trying to head the ball or chest the ball down and control it, he was actually flicking it on to other Palace players because there were people supporting him, and that allowed us to actually make better use of our possession because we weren't just giving it away to Brighton. We were actually having players around him to pass the ball around. That allowed us to play slightly further up the pitch, and you know, that made up for the fact that he had very few opportunities to make an impact in the first half. So much like Ayew, the fact that he battled well but to little effect in the first half and then came out even better in the second half is why I've given him a 6 and why I'm impressed with his performance. Now, like I said early into that second half, you know, a nice sort of clean, well, almost clean through break on goal early in the second half. You know, in terms of that chance slidden from Ayew, obviously was unlucky there, and then obviously hit the crossbar as well with a cross come shot, obviously out wide. I think it was on, well, I was sitting in the home zone, so it was down the left, so down Palace's right. Obviously whipped the ball in. Obviously it looked more of a cross to me because there was people like Zaha and, you know, other players in and around the area. But, you know, the fact that he came off the crossbar, I think I'd say it was a shot. And, you know, once again, another chance in that second half where he could have finally ended that goal drought that he's going through at the minute. And of course, following that, he also had a good effort saved by Matt Ryan. So whilst his first half performance was disappointing because all he was doing was heading the ball down, which was great, but giving it back to Brighton, in the second half, that little change of having players supporting him actually flicking the ball on to players rather than just giving it away to Brighton, and the fact that he had these 3 good chances in particular was what I was impressed with his performance. And certainly performances like this is big as a question. Yes, he doesn't score, but he's putting in good performances. So if he can just finally just break that duck and get a goal again and hopefully get back to his old self, and like we keep saying this time and time again and it doesn't happen, but there's potential there. We can see the good work he's doing, but hopefully, you know, next few weeks or so he can actually finally get back to his old self in that sense. But, you know, like I said, I do think the 6 overall for Benteke is a fair result. So I'm now going to move on to the final player, and that is of course Wilfried Zaha, who I'm going to give a 7 overall. Now, what else can I say about this guy? Because he's been a lifesaver once again, stopped the embarrassment of losing to Brighton. And, you know, in terms of his record against Brighton, obviously nice for him on a personal note to score yet another goal against a team from the South Coast. But in terms of Zaha's performance, I've given him a 7, and it's primarily down to the goal he scored because, of course, that was a really well taken effort. Obviously, the ball's come into the area, Tompkins has flicked it on, and Zaha's done the magic, got past 2-3 players, and just rifled it top bins past the goalkeeper at the near post. So obviously the finish, the control, everything, and the skill, that was obviously all great about it. But actually, it's the rating I've given him is mainly down to his second half performance, because in that first half, didn't have many chances, didn't have the real opportunity to put his influence on the game, and that's just because as a team we weren't playing that well, and we just basically made it easy for Brighton. So in the first half, understandably, he struggled, but in that second half, aside from the goal he scored, he really got back into it. You know, we were actually looking to fully utilise our flanks, we were looking to get the ball to Zaha, we were looking to obviously have all of our attacks come through him. We were actually really sort of making him the focal point of our attack. Obviously, we know he always is the talisman for us, but in this game in particular, we were playing so bad in the first half that actually we had to make sure that Zaha was the focal point, and that's exactly what he did. You know, he came to our rescue, and thankfully he did, because as the game wore on, obviously there were a little bit more spaces, there were gaps in behind which Brighton were leaving, so of course the chance was there for Zaha, and it was just tactical changes in terms of allowing Zaha to play further forward, allowing people like McCarthy to actually go forward and pass the ball to him a bit more. You know, little changes like this obviously allowed Zaha's performance to improve, because we were giving the ball to him more, was allowing him to get involved more, but also it sort of affected the team as a whole, which of course was really great to see. But in terms of the goal, you know, fantastically taken goal. The fact that he cut inside, he jinked past players, used his skill,
and then just smashed it past Ryan. Obviously, being in the upper homes, though, absolute carnage up there in terms of it's right in front of you. You can see the goal happen. You see all the movement, the flick on from Tompkins, the dribbling from Zaha. So everything about that was fantastic, and it was a relief, because being 1-0 down, the possibility of losing against your rivals because there's only 15 minutes or so left in the game. So the fact that he came to our rescue with a great goal, combine that with just an overall fantastic attacking performance in the second half, I must say, because the first half probably a 5 out of 10. So the fact that he made up for that with the goal and with his second half performance is why I've given him the 7 overall. So I'm now going to move briefly on to the 2 substitutions we made in the game in James McCarthy and Max Meyer. And I'm about to start with James McCarthy, obviously with him being the first one to come on. Obviously came on in the place of Riedwald. Obviously, as I mentioned, he went off at half-time with the injury. And McCarthy came on, and obviously that allowed him to play in central midfield, and obviously allowed James McCarthy to move from central midfield to play at left back. And like I said with obviously James McCarthy, he slotted in all right at left back. And in terms of replacing McCarthy's role in midfield, I think McCarthy done a fairly decent job of that. In the first half, we kept losing possession. We were just gifting it away to Brighton. We were making it so easy for them to pass around us. So the fact that McCarthy came on helped us to retain the possession better than we had done in the first half, is why I've given him a 6 overall, because he came on obviously to allow us to play McCarthy at left back, but also came on obviously to replace him as well, and just to allow us to obviously just contain the midfield a little bit better and do a little bit better in terms of actually maintaining possession and not making it so easy for Brighton. So the fact that he came on, obviously that allowed us to move McCarthy and adapt sort of our lineup to put him there. And the fact that McCarthy, done a shift like he normally does do, obviously begs the question, should he start next few games with the injuries we've got and just giving us fresh legs in the team? Because, it's nice to see actually a player comes off the bench, nothing spectacular, but just helps us or improves us on something that we weren't doing in the first half, and that's exactly what we weren't doing in terms of keeping hold of possession. So the fact that he came on, and that thing in particular is something I could pin out and say that's what he improved, was of course goes to show how good he was in that aspect. And in terms of Max Meyer, I'm going to give him a 6 as well, because when he came on, everything seemed to change. We didn't have a shot until like the 70th minute or something like that, and that's exactly the point when Meyer came on. So it just goes to show the influence he can have in terms of carrying the ball forward, in terms of being involved and being that pioneer in the team, was obviously really, really great to see. And it once again, much like McCarthy, begs the question, should he be starting for Palace? I personally think he should be. Whether it's on a rotation between maybe someone like Chiarte and McCarthy drops out and McCarthy and Meyer come in, or one of them drops out, one of them comes in, or one of them actually comes off the bench earlier than they normally would do. We really need to get people like McCarthy and Meyer involved, and Meyer in particular, because when he came off the bench, we obviously before that were finding it hard to break Brighton down, but just that connection that Meyer has with Zaha that allows them to run rampant down that left-hand side, the creativity of Meyer to find passes, the ability for him to obviously hold up the ball and create space, everything that Max Meyer brings to the team off the bench, if we just have that for a little bit longer and he started games, then we'd see his influence even more, because as we saw in his performance here, he was the changing one, he was the focal point, and in terms of changing the game, he certainly did do that. And you've got to give Roy Hodgson credit as well for actually bringing on people like McCarthy and bringing on Meyer as well, actually bringing on them as early as he did. Obviously McCarthy less so, because that was all an enforced substitution with the injury to Riedwald. But in terms of Max Meyer, the fact that he brought him on earlier than he would normally do goes to show that Roy Hodgson was taking that initiative, by actually putting players on early, because if you bring creative players on, they can make an impact, and that's certainly what we saw with Meyer's performance there. So both James McCarthy and Max Meyer, both of our substitutions, I do think these 6s I've given him are a fair result. Now, to be honest, just going into a small summary of the game, before the game I said to someone, look, I'll just take a 0-0 now, I'll take a draw, only because I'd much rather not get humiliated by Brighton again, because of course they've done the double over us last season, so anything other than that I would have taken. And given the fact that we had all the injuries and we're not that great in front of goal, I would have taken the draw. But considering how atrocious we were in the first 70 minutes or so, that statement about just I'll be okay with a draw is even more relevant, because of how bad we were in that first 70 minutes or so. It just makes the draw seem even better. And obviously the electric last 20 minutes or so where we got back into it and we had loads of chances after that, yes, that was great, but we shouldn't have been in that place in the first place, because if we just performed well in the first 70 minutes or so, we probably would have been drawing, or we would have been ahead in the game, or we wouldn't have been we wouldn't have been as dominated as we were by Brighton. So obviously, yes, before the game I said I would have taken a draw, but I certainly would have taken a draw given the context of the game and considering how bad we were in the first 7 minutes or so. And I suppose, yes, the last 20 minutes or so were great, but you know, the Zaha goal, piece of magic from him, sort of papers over the cracks. The fact that, yes, we were okay defensively, but once we made that mistake, we didn't have a plan B, and it was sort of the plan C and getting the ball to Zaha again and just relying on him, which allowed us to get back into the game. So if we just, you know, play like we've done in recent games, you know, you're looking at the West Ham game, you're looking at the Bournemouth game, you know, if we just performed like that in this game here and actually done it for the full 90 minutes rather than leaving it for the final 20 minutes, if we just done that, we would have seen a whole improvement in our performance. And what I suppose what you could see, and I've seen people say this and I thought I might as well mention it, I'm not 100% with this, but I suppose when you're looking at this game here, it shows the combination of the lack of investment from Parish and the board and the American owners, and obviously Roy Hodgson's sort of redundant tactics as well. So in terms of the investment, I think we can all say that we should have had at least one cover, you know, at right back. We don't, so obviously Martin Kelly was playing there, and of course at left back we should have had at least another option there or someone else to play in the defence. But obviously because we didn't invest in them areas, and also going forward we didn't invest in another winger, so it meant that when Andros was injured, obviously we had to play Ayew out wide and bring Benteke back into the team. So obviously the game here, the fact that we were so bad for 70 minutes was down to obviously the fullbacks and giving away possession, and down to our attackers not actually attacking Brighton. So, you know, that's a combination of the lack of investment because we don't have the players to play well, you know, or we can play well, but, you know, if we had someone else in there, maybe we could have played even better. And obviously the tactics as well. Yes, in the end it worked. You know, Roy Hodgson went to plan C and, you know, changed up the system a little bit more, which allowed, you know, the you know, I think Sky Sports really highlighted it really well, you know, in terms of the fullbacks would mark one sort of, or your two wingers, so Ayew and Zaha were marking the central midfielders, and of course that allowed us just to deal and dictate the play more so than we did in the first half. So even though Roy Hodgson's tactics to begin the game, you know, it was so boring, so negative, just basically meant that Brighton were on top of us. Yes, you know, that and the mixture and combination of lack of investment played a part in how bad the performance was, but also you've got to say Roy Hodgson, when it did matter, he made substitutions, he made changes to the tactics, and that allowed us to get a better control of the game. And I suppose, you know, one of the main changes he made, aside from getting people like Ayew and people like Zaha obviously to track the midfielders, restricting them, it was all down to Max Meyer. The fact that when he came on, we were able to get on that front foot, we were able to get the ball forward, able to get actually the ball to the feet of Zaha, the feet to Ayew, to Benteke as well. And that is no surprise because Meyer, we know, is a very creative player, and that's exactly what we saw here. You know, Benteke, Ayew, Zaha, obviously together they were electric, but that was all down to Max Meyer playing in behind them, and just that impact and that sort of impetus he brought off the bench is, you know, really begs the question why he hasn't started a game in a while because of just how good he is, but also begs the question why he isn't in the team more, because as that showed here, we've got to start him because it's not rocket science. He clearly has an influence in the game, and as we saw here, you know, he was the difference between us losing that game, a third game in a row with a loss against Brighton, and between us actually getting back into the game and, you know, having a few chances towards the end of the game to obviously score a winning goal. But, you know, in terms of the game here, we put it behind us. At least we didn't lose the game, which is my outlook. Obviously we played badly, so anything other than a loss was good in my eyes. So even though Zaha's goal sort of papers over the cracks of a bad performance, I'll take a draw nonetheless. And, you know, we've really got to improve now. We've got Brighton, we've got Newcastle now at the weekend. Put Brighton behind us. You know, we've got Newcastle at the weekend. Focus on that. Improve both our defensive and offensive work. Hopefully get a few players back from injury. Probably not going to happen, but, you know, here's hoping, touch wood, maybe someone makes a miraculous recovery and we can at least have some sort of more impetus in the team. And even if we're not going to have players back from injury, at least give people from the academy, people like Samwers, people like Tarek Mitchell, give people like this a chance, because you've got someone like Riedewald, gave him the chance and he done all right offensively, but defensively he was suspect. So surely an academy player can't do any worse. And if you have the players like Tompkins, people like MacArthur around them as well to guide them through the game, then it can't do any wrong trying out academy players as well. So really need to improve, obviously, for the game against Newcastle at the weekend. A big game there, and obviously another chance to get some valuable points over this Christmas period. You know, obviously it hasn't been bad that far so far. You know, the last 4 games we haven't lost, and hopefully we can continue that record going forward. But, you know, in terms of the games we've got coming up, you know, likes of Newcastle, likes of West Ham, these are really good chances for us to pick up points.
So I'm now going to move on to my man of the match award, but before I do that and give you my man of the match and who I thought the biggest influence in the game, I'm now going to give you the 4 nominations I put forward for the award. And when you consider it was very sort of a lacklustre performance from us, in the fact that we weren't at it and Brighton were just, maintaining possession, passing the ball around us, and it was only sort of until sort of the last sort of 15, even 10 minutes or so of the game, the final sort of period of the game, that we actually started to get into it, started to actually attack Brighton. Now we actually obviously got the goal and then had chances after that. So if you're looking at sort of the first 70, 75 minutes or so, is obviously very difficult to put through a man of the match, only because just across the team we weren't really playing that well and we were just basically making it too easy for Brighton. But obviously there are a few plays that stack out for me, but obviously after that sort of period, right towards the end of the game, we had to go a goal down for us to actually buck our ideas up, and obviously we improved after that. But the 4 players for me who actually stood out, not just in that period, but obviously across the whole game, I think there's a fair reflection of positions across the field. So I've gone with Vicente Guaita, James Tompkins, Christian Benteke and Wilfried Zaha. So a nice mix there. Now in terms of Guaita, once again, he never really fails to impress me, but this was a very impressive performance from him, in the fact that, Brighton obviously had loads more possession than we did, so they had loads more chances. And obviously Guaita, in the first half, a few difficult balls to claim, he was able to do that, some quite high up in terms of running out and catching them, others, him going down low and, claiming them. And then there was one other time as well where he actually headed the ball out for a throw-in. So the fact that whatever was thrown at him, he was able to deal with it relatively well, particularly in that first half, was obviously great to see. And yes, there was a little fumble in the second half there, but the fact that when called upon, considering Brighton had loads more chances than we had and they were just in control of the game, we needed a defence in Guaita just to stand up and actually make the contribution to make up for our bad performance. And the fact that Guaita did that was the thing that impressed me, so I'm going to put him forward for the award. In terms of James Tompkins, in terms of our defence, other than the goal we conceded, we were obviously fairly solid at the back, but that's just because of how boring we were playing. Because yes, Brighton didn't have as many chances as maybe other teams would have if they were playing well, but nevertheless, I think he done all right at his job. The fact that he put in some well-timed challenges. There was one time, where he was able to obviously get the last touch in to get the ball away, able to, even though he's not the fastest player, actually chase down Brighton players as well. So the fact that he done that, combined with the fact that he got the assist for Zaha's goal, nice little flick onto Zaha, obviously, to level things up, that was obviously great to see. So whilst obviously as a collective, as a team, we weren't playing that great, we were still alright defensively, because Brighton were just throwing stuff at us and we just had to keep defending. So it weren't a matter of the fact that we were defending well against how good Brighton were playing. We kept defending against Brighton because we weren't getting out of our own area in the box, and that is why people like Tompkins, obviously there was a lot of pressure on them, but then obviously they rose to the challenge and played well as well. Now in terms of Christian Benteke, obviously I've criticised him quite a lot this season, but actually this was a really good game from him, playing as the main striker but also drifting out wide to the flanks as well. But the fact that in that first half in particular, even though we weren't playing well, he was looking to win headers, and even though in that first half his headers were not going to anyone, they were just going back to Brighton players, at least he was actually winning these headers and actually getting into these advanced positions. And actually, going into the second half, he continued that, and actually he improved his flick-ons. They were actually going to people like Ayew, people like McCarthy, people like Zaha, players around him when Benteke was actually heading them down. Unlike the first half, where he was winning them, but giving possession back to Brighton, he was actually headering and controlling them and actually putting them to Palace players as well. And alongside that, had a few nice chances himself, particularly in the Brighton box. Obviously one hit the crossbar, it was a cross-come shot, but let's say a shot, and obviously one as well saved by Matt Ryan. So the fact that it was such an improvement on his performances this season, the fact that he was winning headers, the fact that he had a few chances, considering he still hasn't scored in a while, I'm going to give him praise for that, so that's why I put him forward for the award. And in terms of Wilfried Zaha, what more is there to say? In a game where we're not playing great, we're absolutely diabolical really in terms of just making it so easy for Brighton. So the fact that that one little moment of magic where Zaha steps up to the plate, carries the whole team and just rifles that shot past Ryan was absolutely fantastic. So the fact that, yes, he may not have had many chances, but when that one chance came, and he had loads of chances, or a flurry of chances right at the end of the game, but the fact that that one chance he had, he exerted his influence, cut inside on his weaker foot and just rifled it past the keeper, and in terms of, the cut in and the jinking inside, everything about that goal was really great to see. So whilst for the majority of the game he was restricted,
once he got going, particularly towards the end of the game when it really mattered, he carried the whole team to obviously get us that all-important goal. Now, obviously, like I've said, you know, as a collective, it weren't the best team performance, but I think these 4 players, for me, do deserve a little bit more credit, only because they're just across the 90 minutes they were obviously performing better than the others. And for me, I think there's only one clear candidate here, and that's just because of the amount of saves he made, just that sheer confidence and solidity he brings to the back line, and that's of course Vicente Guaita. So congratulations, Vicente. You don't get a trophy or certificate, but you do get my sincere congratulations on what was yet another solid performance from you. And, you know, like I've said there, you know, the reason I've given it to him as opposed to others is just for the sheer amount of how commanding he was, how good his saves were, and just that calming presence he brings to the back line. Because I think without him, we probably would have conceded maybe 2, even 3 goals, and that's just down to the fact that, you know, just the little saves he made here, or, you know, little catches here, or that header out for a throw-in, little things like that, and little things that added to our game to make up for the fact that we were just making it so easy for Brighton. So the fact that we had people like him obviously stepping up to the plate was of course great to see, and of course special mentions to Tompkins, Benteke and Zaha for their good performances as well. So obviously comment below with your thoughts who you think should be on my shortlist, if you think I've missed someone out, and of course comment below with your overall man of the match. So now you've heard my match report, player rankings and my man of the match. That concludes this week's podcast. Now I've got interviews with Roy Hodgson, Wilfried Zaha, Christian Benteke and Scott Dann following the game.
A mixture of joy and perhaps relief to battle back for a point there?
Yeah, today is obviously a big game for both of the teams, and I'm just glad we managed to get back in it, really. If you can't win it, don't lose. So yeah, I'm glad we managed to get that point at least.
And how good is it to see that ball go in, with your weaker foot no less?
I don't know, I was just so overjoyed. I was just glad I managed to get the goal for the team, because we worked so hard. We've got a good run going, so I'm glad we can carry it on.
Up to then, do Brighton deserve credit for limiting the amount of ball that you got, the amount of opportunities that you and your fellow strikers got today?
Yeah, definitely, because we barely had the ball. So even having attacks, we were too tired to even do anything. So props to them, they did their job in the first half, but we had to do something second half.
You're no stranger to scoring a goal or 2 against Brighton, are you? When you look back over them, just how does this compare, perhaps in terms of its importance?
Each goal is massive, really, because this is a big game. So over the time, obviously, there's been more important goals, but I feel like every goal that I can get in the game is important, so I'm glad I could get one today.
And do you feel overall that it was deserved point the way Palace did battle back in that second half?
Yeah, definitely. We didn't have the best first half because we basically didn't do anything. But second half, I think we pushed on, we pressed them, and I feel like we deserved the point at least.
The main thing was not to lose this one, was it? Particularly with the injuries you've got at the moment.
Yeah, it's been hard with the injuries, but the Gaffers managed to do what he could, and we managed to draw the game today.
Christian, back in the team today, and it was a tough game, wasn't it?
I think it was a tough game, but we knew that it was going to be intense. It's a derby, and I think the first half was a little bit difficult for us because tactically they were good. They were comfortable on the ball, Brighton, and they looked more dangerous than us. But second half we changed our tactic, and we looked more dangerous.
Yeah, had James McArthur coming on at left back, but I didn't expect that at the start of the game.
No, we didn't expect that. And when we came back in the dressing room at the half time, we saw that Zaha was struggling with his groin. And Maka just played that, but we didn't even expect that he was going to play that. But to be honest, we did really deep, and we showed more character than anything else on the second half.
It took a while for chances to come, but when they did eventually, you nearly scored, didn't you?
Yeah, I think this kind of game you just focus on working hard for the team and then try to get your chance when it comes. And today it was I was pleased to be back on the team, and I will just keep working hard.
And then Wilfried Zaha, when he gets the ball in that position, so often he's dangerous.
Yeah, we all know that Wilf, when as soon as he got the ball, something happened every time. So he's a big player for us, and he showed again tonight how important he is for this team and for this club.
And with the injuries and the fact they had so much of the ball in the first half, are you pleased with the point?
I think, to be honest, we will take it and move on, because second half was not our best half, and then second half was much better than the first half. So we have to take this point and move on into Newcastle.
Yeah, I think on the balance of play, especially the first half, they played really well. Put us under a lot of pressure, albeit they didn't have many chances. They had a lot of the ball, and yeah, it was a difficult game, and it was nice that we dug in and ground the point out in the end through a great goal from Wilf.
So many changes in the defence recently. It's incredible that there's been just come off the back of 3 clean sheets and then only 1 this evening.
Yeah, obviously up until I don't know, a week ago we had a strong squad, lots of competition. People not even making it onto the bench, and then all of a sudden, kind of a bit of a mini injury crisis, and don't have no left backs, and Martin's been playing and doing really well since Joel got injured, and then we lost Gaz. So I mean, it's difficult losing good players, but that's when the squad has to come into it, and obviously myself, Gyro, Christian, people like that have been on the bench for quite a while now to come in and obviously contribute. It's nice, and I think over this next period going into Christmas, it obviously gets busier. Hopefully we can get some players back, but if not, we have to keep on putting in dogged performances like that when we need to.
Played a lot with James MacArthur over the years, but not in the same back four. How do you do it left back?
I mean, it's James, isn't it? You could put him anywhere and he'll give 110%. I'm sure if you asked him would he like to play there again, he'd probably say no, but I thought he's done a good job. Give everything he got, and that's what you get from him week in, week out, wherever you ask him to play.
And then it was a bit of magic from Wilf to get the equaliser.
Yeah, I mean, with the way the game was going, they get the goal. Obviously, we didn't play really well in the first half. They get the goal, and then you want to try and get the ball to Wilf as much as you can. We didn't quite get it to him enough throughout the game, and then you get it to him there, and he's capable of doing that every week. And it's nice that he's in the last few weeks he started to turn the performances into goals, and it was a great strike, and worthy of getting us a point.
And finally, how do you feel about how the season's gone for you so far?
I mean, it's difficult sitting on the bench. I'm not going to lie. I haven't sat on the bench for pretty much all my career. Obviously, I had a tough injury. I was out for a long time. Come back, and the lads have been doing really well. So it's you have to bide your time, and try and when you get the chance, try and perform. But I'm like any other player. You want to play week in, week out, and yeah, it was nice to get some minutes on the pitch.
Roy, good evening. That was a good performance, I thought, by Brighton. Are you therefore quite happy with the point at the end, especially with the quality of the goal?
I'm very happy with the point, given the fact that our team was virtually decimated after the Watford game. We've been lacking a left back really going into the Watford game since the Van Aanholt injury, and then to lose Jeffrey Schlupp, and then to lose Jairo Wiedeval at half time, have to finish the game with a central midfield player playing at left back, to have no Gary Cahill, to have no Sacco, to have no Jeffrey Schlupp, to have no Andros Townsend. Our situation going into this game was not looking relatively bleak. I thought Brighton, of course, played well in the first half of the game. I think we were guilty, as a coaching team, of probably encouraging the players to attack them too high up the field and to really get into their faces, because we know how they play out from the back, but they succeeded in playing around us, which made it hard for us. We rectified that to some extent in the second half, and I thought we finished the game very strongly. But most importantly of all, I thought it was a wonderful, gutsy, resilient, determined performance, full of absolute character, which I think is typified really by the crowd here and the support of the crowd here. So in the end, on a day like today, the way the game panned out, I think I've got to be very satisfied that we took a point from the game. And to be honest, it feels even like half a victory.
What was your view of Wilf's goal? It was a decent effort.
Yeah, it was a very good goal. They scored a very good goal too. I mean, the ball that was volleyed back across the penalty box after the long diagonal, and the way Maupay got the ball out of his feet and quickly got his shot away before we could close him down. That was a very good goal. I'm certain Graham Potter would have been very pleased with that goal. But we were equally as delighted, if not more delighted, with Wilf's equaliser, which of course came at a time when we were starting to ask a few questions in and around their penalty area and looking as if a goal might be likely, which to be honest it hadn't looked like being in the first 60 minutes of the game.
Well, you mentioned Gyro there. Did he go off with an injury then rather than being replaced?
Yes, oh yeah, he was injured before the game. I mean, it was touch and go whether he could take part. He was due to play from the start of the week. When I say the start of the week, after the Watford game, when we knew there was no Van Aanholt, we knew there was no Jeffrey Schlupp. He was our chosen alternative to play at left back. So we've been working during the week towards that. And in yesterday's training, which is a very light training, day before the game, as everyone would understand, he somehow contrived to get a slight knock on his hip, which until the warm-up today looked like it was going to keep him out of the game entirely. But he came through the warm-up. He said he was prepared and able to play, but that only lasted until half-time. So he's another injury we can add to our growing list. And the worst thing is the list. Everyone has injuries at times during the season, but it's so unusual that they're all virtually in the same position. You know, we had 3 players who can play left back. We've lost all 3. We're now looking for a 4th, and that's a hard task.
Any idea how long that's going to last?
Well, for the ones, I mean, Patrick Van Aanholt, we're hoping, because it was a muscle injury, he's working at it, and we're hoping that might not be quite so long. But with Jeffrey Schlupp, it's a long-term injury. With Andros Townsend, a long-term injury. With Gary Cahill, he's had a minor operation. That will be a relatively long-term injury. And with Bakary Sakho, he's got one more game of his suspension to serve. And with Andros Townsend, I mentioned Andros, he's got a long-term injury too.
So there you have it. Now you've heard what Roy Hodgson, Wilfried Zaha, Christian Mateke and Scott Dan had to say after the game. That concludes this week's podcast for the game against Brighton. But make sure to come back next week for my post-match review of the game against Newcastle. So thanks for listening, and remember to up the Palace.